Love them or hate them, the Ultramarines are the quintessential Space Marine chapter, and their successors uphold that image in several different flavors. Easily the most numerous chapter culture, the web formed by the Sons of Guilliman spans most of the known galaxy and includes some of the most legendary Astartes forces ever known. But deciding where to start is never easy, and we need to start somewhere, so why not start at the beginning? These are every single one of the second founding chapters of the Ultramarines. Just after the Horus Heresy, Ultramarines Primarch Rabute Guilliman penned the Codex Astartes, which laid down new laws and protocols for everything from individual squad tactics all the way up to the organization of the legions into smaller forces called chapters. The idea was that the Astartes are too powerful to be allowed to control such huge numbers of warriors under one banner, as had been the case with the old legionary system, which empowered traitors to rip the Imperium apart with thousands and thousands of superhuman killing machines. Luckily, during the Great Crusades, many legions took on the practice of forming little subgroups called chapters, which took their own iconography and fought as a cohesive force, similar to how the companies operate today. These chapters operated inside their legions all the way through the heresy. So after the dust had settled and Guilliman had penned his new laws, the remaining 9 loyal legions of Space Marines were split into chapters of no more than 1,000 Astartes warriors, with some exceptions, but that's a topic for another time. Being the biggest legion by a country mile, the Ultramarines, Guilliman's own army, ended up with the most offshoots of any other force. These new forces were called successors, and this event was the second founding, with the first batch being created mostly from the chapters that already existed inside their parent legions. Now, since there are exactly 800 quadrillion Ultramarine successors, we decided that it would be better to start with the 17 second founding chapters and perhaps continue with more influential successors from other foundings later. So, now that the preamble is over, we can begin. No, this isn't a trick. The Ultramarines are the first on our list today. It's important to understand that even though the old legions still technically existed after the second founding, that event included the sort of reforging of the legions into a chapter organization. The only thing that changed was the size of the force itself. So because we have already gone over the Ultramarines in our Legion video, we won't say much more here. They maintained most of their best gear, vehicles, and ships, as well as keeping their home planet of Macrogge and the entire empire of Ultramar, which still left them in the position of being one of the most powerful Space Marine forces in the Imperium, and considering their successor chapters are very happy to work together on larger campaigns, the Ultramarines really didn't lose much in the shuffle. Originally the 4th chapter of the Ultramarines Legion, the Aurorans were a heavy mechanized battle group who used a symbolic ribbon and the color green to mark out their veterans. They made their mark in the Legion's history during the Heresy when they were stationed on the world of Kauth in the Ultramar system. Here, they took horrendous casualties from elements of the Wordbearers and the traitor titan group Legio Sutrevora. They rallied and held the capital city for as long as they could before a flood of demons pushed them off-world, but their tenacity in the face of overwhelming odds was not forgotten. Once established as an independent force, the Aurora chapter took on the green hue of their veterans, as well as the ribbon insignia, settling on the planet of Firestorm in the Ultima Segmentum, a planet which is marked with large factorum complexes that keep their Astartes masters supplied with tanks, ammunition, and war gear. From here, they guard their sector from threats, primarily using masses of tanks and other heavy armor. When fighting the Aurora chapter, enemies are often met with the first sight of a sea of boxy green hulls, right before being flattened by efficient and precise tank fire. A chapter that has only recently come back from the brink of extinction, the Black Consuls were once well known as the most dogmatic and rigid successors out of all the second founding, and probably even of any successors of any founding. After being split from the main Ultramarine force, the Black Consuls chose black as their main armor color with yellow or gold accents, and the white head of an eagle as their symbol. They were one of the few fleet-based chapters to come out of this founding for the Ultramarines, operating out of an ancient star fort called Noctis Obscurum, until its warp drive was destroyed by Drakari saboteurs, stranding the whole chapter base. They were towed to the planet Cyclopia on the edge of Segmentum Pacificus, and continued their duties from there, starting with a purge of all Dark Eldars across 15 nearby systems. But that wasn't what led to the near extinction of the Black Consuls. Records indicate that about 3 centuries ago, the vast majority of the chapter was destroyed during the siege of Godith Hive, where they were victorious against a combined force of Iron Warriors and Wordbearers. In a staggering act of spite, the defeated traitors detonated the Hive's nucleonic reactor, obliterating themselves, the Hive, the Black Consuls, and the entire continent with them. The only surviving members of the chapter were warriors who had been on recruiting missions or seconded to other chapters, or forces like the Death Watch. This is so few members that the Black Consuls were all but dead, the last Astartes wearing the black and gold consigning themselves to finding an honorable death. However, they were saved from fading into history by the arrival of their Primarch Rabute Guilliman and his Indomitus Crusade. Newly revived, Guilliman brought with him an entire chapter's worth of new Primaris Astartes warriors to fill out the ranks of the Black Consuls, giving them a second chance at service. Today, the Black Consuls operate as one of the 20 Space Marine chapters that guard the Eye of Terror against incursions by the forces of chaos. Specializing in drop pod assaults, these warriors are often the first Astartes on a battlefield, establishing a beachhead for further deployments. It's dangerous work, but if near extinction didn't make the consuls more cautious, nothing will. Clad in silver and red, the Doom Eagles are probably one of the strangest of the second founding successors, and not just because they prefer to rely heavily on their jump pack wearing assault troops. As their name would suggest, the Doom Eagles have a very bleak philosophy, or at least it would be if Space Marines were capable of feeling despair to any large degree. The chapter as a whole practices a sort of religious focus on the fact that every one of them is one step away from death at any time. This is true, of course. Astartes, like any other soldier, are prone to meeting their end at a moment's notice. Being superhuman doesn't stop you from being atomized by a las cannon after all. But the strange thing is that the Doom Eagles are still very ultramarine-y about the whole thing. Their thinking is that while Space Marines are indeed fearless and conditioned to be able to face centuries of war without major mental health issues, they are still human to some degree, and even the toughest Astartes can sometimes have complex feelings about the eternal war situation. So, to counter this, the Doom Eagles obsess about their own death, using it to harden their resolve even more than their fellow Space Marines from other chapters, and embrace a sort of noble apathy about the value of life. Regardless of whether this mindset is effective or not, the Doom Eagles are so highly regarded among their brother chapters that when the Primarch Guilliman returned, he appointed them to one of the 10 shield chapters of Ultramar, giving them and 9 other successors the duty to watch over the Ultramarine Empire from their home planet of Gathis II. Every Astartes chapter lives in combat with very little downtime between campaigns, but the Eagle Warriors began their history going from planet to planet, putting out fires of rebellion in the wake of the Horus Heresy. Wearing blue and white armor in a striking halved pattern, the Eagle Warriors are the most knight-like of the second founding successors. Their need to constantly hop from warzone to warzone during their early years led them to maintaining a fleet-based existence, rather than settling on a particular planet. The only truly interesting thing to have happened to the Eagle Warriors was that they lost an entire company while responding to a distress signal from Zircon Primus. Records indicate that they assisted the Flesh Terrors chapter in combating a group of Kornate cultists, but nothing else. The truth is that during the fighting, several members of the Flesh Terrors succumbed to the Black Rage and began killing anything in sight. To keep the secret shame of the Blood Angels and their successors safe, the Flesh Terrors were forced to destroy the entire Eagle Warriors company. Other than that, however, the Eagle Warriors are a fairly standard Ultramarines chapter. They follow the Codex Astartes strictly and haven't suffered any catastrophic losses. They have performed well throughout their history, but just about every chapter is like that. I suppose we had to run across an unremarkable chapter at some point. The very first of the second founding successors, the Red Armored Genesis chapter, was formed not from an internal group, but the surviving veterans of the Horus Heresy. As such, the Genesis chapter has always operated so closely with its parent chapter that they seem to be more or less just another large company of the Ultramarines. Their homeworld, Newfound, is within orbital spitting distance of Ultramar itself, and the two chapters routinely gather to compare notes about the application of the Codex Astartes. Not only that, but warriors from the Genesis chapter are routinely used to fill gaps in Ultramarine strike forces when their numbers get too low, and the chapter also maintains a mortal fighting force similar to the famed Ultramar Auxilia, made mostly of chapter serfs. This Militarum-style army is well equipped and is used to garrison chapter fortresses and support their Astartes masters during extended defense campaigns. For the bulk of their history, the Genesis chapter has acted mostly in the defense of Ultramarine territories, setting a standard for many other successors. Just because they can't be a legion anymore doesn't mean they can't act like one. The green armored Inceptors are only notable for one thing: how they died. But to tell that story, we have to talk about the Lord Solar. In early M41, there was an Imperial commander, the Lord Solar Macarius. This man would go on to become a living saint and one of the greatest generals of the Astra Militarum to ever exist. When he eventually died, the generals under his command began to bicker and argue about who would take the mantle of Lord Solar, eventually descending into outright violence. The resultant civil war was called the Macarian Heresy, as the various generals refused to answer to the authority of Holy Terra, setting up little empires on the fringes of Imperial space. It was at this point that the Space Marines were called in, and the Inceptors were one of the chapters who showed up. Now you might be thinking that the Inceptors perished in a blaze of glory, fighting to bring these traitorous warlords to justice, or maybe that they were lost in some warp storm or other random mishap. But no, it was much more stupid than that. At the end of the campaign, an argument developed between members of the Inceptors and another chapter called the Doom Warriors, not to be confused with the Doom Eagles, whom we have already discussed. Lots of doom in the Imperium these days, apparently. Now, history does not record what this disagreement was about, but both chapters felt strongly that this was a matter of honor, and so the former allies set up a sort of moderated war deciding on rules and what constituted win conditions, and then began fighting. The problem is that when those win conditions were met, they didn't stop fighting. That's right, these two chapters had fought alongside one another to quell this rebellion, had gotten so bent out of shape about some probably very inconsequential slight that they had started a whole war with each other and then refused to stop. So that's when the High Lords of Terra sent in their favorite chapter to deal with the issue. The Minotaurs arrived in their bronze and red ships and made planetfall with the express purpose being to make those two bickering chapters stop fighting by shooting them. For those who don't know them, the Minotaurs do not mess around, and since these two other chapters had already been severely depleted by fighting a long campaign and then each other, they were both routed within the first engagement. The Doom Warriors were able to retreat, but the Inceptors had been caught out in the open and were slowly encircled. And even then, they refused to surrender until there were just under 100 remaining warriors. Humiliated, the Inceptors had most of their chapter relics and their battle barge flagship taken as further punishment. There isn't much else to be written about the Inceptors, so we could assume that those last warriors broke up to work with other chapters and find a good death. But this incident did take place before Gilman began his Indomitus Crusade, so perhaps the Inceptors are in the process of rebuilding using a stock of fresh Primaris recruits. Let's hope any new recruits inherit more sense from their Ultramarine brothers. The Iron Snakes are not the most deviant Ultramarine successor, but their organization is different in some very strange ways. Wearing unpainted steel armor with white pauldrons, the Iron Snakes don't have any companies at all, despite holding to the Codex standard of keeping 1,000 active battle brothers at all times. Instead of the usual company-based organization, the chapter is grouped into standard 10 Marine squads, with each squad's deeds being meticulously recorded. These squads are named after their very first sergeants, with the oldest bearing the name of Marines who served in the Horus Heresy. These squads are referred to as notables and lead chapter efforts according to their specialty. Whenever a squad is completely wiped out, it is reconstituted under its original name with a new batch of Marines. In this way, even long-serving notable squads have a blend of veteran and novice warriors. It should come as no surprise that the Iron Snakes specialize in the use of infantry, as their tactical squads hold such an important place in their organization and vary greatly in their use of weaponry. And on that note, the chapter also makes extensive use of combat shields and a type of spear called a sea lance, patterned off of the traditional javelins used to hunt the giant sea snakes on their homeworld of Ithaca. They are also known to train and use dogs in combat, which is certainly unique among the Astartes. Regardless of how different they are from the other Ultramarine successors, they don't seem to be spurned like other chapters, for example, the Mortifactors. The Iron Snakes have a long history of glorious contributions to the defense of Imperial worlds, and their stewardship of the Drakari-infested Reef Stars has been the stuff of legend. The Libators continue the proud tradition of Ultramarine successors being either perfect clones of their parent chapter or barely recognizable as being sons of Guilliman. The Libators are the latter. Wearing bright yellow armor with a black power pack, the Libators fight and operate like most other Ultramarine successors, which means that they are infamous for one thing and one thing only: blood rituals. Yeah, that's a big departure from even the more death-focused successors like the Doom Eagles or Mortifactors, but the Libators are mostly known for their brutal efficiency in combat, which is often capped with bloodletting after the fighting is over. Their chaplains lead rituals where they gather the vitae of their enemies, living or dead, and treat it as an offering to their Primarch and the Emperor. Needless to say, this sort of wacky behavior is certainly not tolerated among the Ultramarines, and the Libators have been censured more than once for it, likely while getting some extreme side-eye from the Inquisition, who were worried about this very Khorne-like behavior. Some of the chapters on this list seem relatively normal, but have little suspicious tells that mark them as separate, and possibly not even Ultramarine successors at all. The Mortifactors, however, are the opposite. They seem abnormal and suspicious even to their fellow successors, but they are actually some of the most staunch defenders of humanity operating presently. The Mortifactors are organized and fight in a way compliant with the teachings of the Codex Astartes, with the exception of their armor. Colored in black and bone, the strangest tradition they have is that they do not allow their newer warriors to wear helmets until they make their first worthy kill. The key word here being worthy. Once they do, they are then given a helmet and told to decorate it with the skull of the foe that won them their face. In addition, their fortress on their homeworld of Posel was decorated with the engraved skulls of their honored dead and the mostly dead enemies of the chapter. These two major deviations from the Codex made even the Ultramarines themselves suspicious of the Mortifactors. Regardless, they fought with honor and distinction right up until the end of M41, when Posel was destroyed by the rampaging advance of Hive Fleet Leviathan. This came not long after the Mortifactors had committed all 10 companies to the defense of Armageddon and left the chapter without a home and severely mauled. The current status of the Mortifactors is unknown, but they have been spotted lending what little strength they have left to conflicts such as the War of the Beasts and the Plague Wars, indicating that they might be slowly recovering their numbers with the arrival of Primaris reinforcements. The Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy saw the use of tactics that some Primarchs found distasteful but necessary, and even the Ultramarines made use of some of these. This is what led to the formation of the Nemesis chapter inside the Legion. Destroyer squads had at one time been used to varying degrees by all the legions, a tradition stemming from the unification of Terra itself. These squads of heavy support troops would use forbidden weaponry, radiation armaments, bioalchem munitions, Phosphex incendiary rounds, and Guilliman kept all of these squads in one chapter in the hopes that they could eventually be slowly reintegrated to the rest of the Legion after such honorless tactics were no longer needed. This made the warriors of the Nemesis chapter grim and humorless but unyielding, and when they were ordered to defend the world of Calth during the heresy, they excelled in the underground war against their traitorous brothers. After being split from the Ultramarines, Nemesis took green for their armor and a white skull as their emblem, continuing their scorched earth tactics. There's not much in the records about their conduct currently, but it seems like they are still active and mostly used to complete exterminatus campaigns. One of the 10 shield chapters of Ultramar, the Nova Marines are perhaps one of the most recognizable of the Ultramarine successors. Clad in a striking quartered pattern of blue and bone, these warriors have been at the forefront of some of the most notable conflicts since the heresy itself. As such, they were given the world of Honorum by Rabute Guilliman himself and tasked with guarding what was, at the time, one of the farthest northern reaches of the Imperium. This led to the chapters becoming experts in fighting various Xenos forces, mainly the Tau, but they also famously took part in the Badab War against the renegade Space Marine chapters of that conflict. Whatever the enemy, the Nova Marines are so active that many Imperials think they are a fleet-based chapter. In disposition, the Nova Marines are seemingly obsessed with enforcing the tenets of the Codex Astartes, spilling blood in the act of defending it to other Astartes. This has led to a chapter that is very disciplined, with even far-ranging elements maintaining a perfect record of Codex compliance. As a result, the Nova Marines have a great relationship with most of their Imperial organizations. New strike cruisers from the Mechanicus for helping them gather new standard template constructs, enough well-maintained Terminator armor suits to outfit their entire first company, and more Deathwatch alumni than almost any other Ultramarine successor. However, all that being said, there are two areas where the warriors of the Nova Marines don't follow the Codex Astartes. The first is that they maintain a tradition of tattooing their greatest deeds across their bodies, a practice they keep from their recruiting base on Honorum. The second is the culture surrounding their Liberius. Although we don't have many details of exactly how they deviate from the Codex in this area, it is said that the Psychers of the Nova Marines are closer to the Rune Priests of the Space Wolves or the Stormseers of the White Scars. Regardless of this small deviation, these successors are among the finest examples of Guilliman's sons, and many Imperial governors in their sector sleep comfortably knowing that if they call, the Nova Marines will answer swiftly. The Patriarchs of Ulus are another successor chapter who mirror their Ultramarine forebears as much as possible, which means there's not much to say about them, unfortunately. Though the chapter did take an interesting armor pattern, with red limbs and a tan torso and backpack. Upon their formation, the Patriarchs were given stewardship of the planet of Ulus in Ultramar, hence the name. And despite the fact that there's not much about the Patriarchs that is very different from their brother chapters, they do seem to get a lot of preferential treatment. Their home planet is described as a paradise with beautiful forests and mountain ranges. Their position inside the realm of Ultramar lends them a certain stability that some of the more further-ranging successors just don't have. And this reflects in the specialty of the Patriarchs of Ulus. They train some of the most superior marksmen and fencers in the entire sector. This is such a focus for the chapter that veteran Patriarchs are often seconded to other Ultramarine chapters for service as honor guards and other elite units. It's sort of like the Ultramarines just made the Patriarchs into a separate training company for producing veterans, which, while against the spirit of the chapter system, is pretty clever considering the absurd number of Ultramarine successors. Similar to our last entry, the Prors of Orus were set up to be wardens of a place named Orpheus. Over the course of the years, the historical record has changed a bit, with original entries detailing the Praetors' watch over an underground fortress monastery called the Labyrinth of Orphea, while more recent texts list their homeworld as Orpheus Prime. Since Orpheus Prime is both more recent and actually had a recorded history, it's safe to assume that this is the correct answer. The planet, while itself not being directly inside the realm of Ultramar, is listed as one of the recruiting worlds for the Ultramarines Legion before the heresy. It makes sense then that a new chapter would be created to keep watch over this valuable world and continues to take recruits from the population there. The Praetors themselves wear white armor with a light blue power pack and accents. It is said that the chapter maintains a knowledge base of technology that is second only to the Mechanicus itself, making the Praetors of Orpheus the most handy members of the Ultramarine successors. Silver and gray blue mark the Silver Eagles, but little else. Throughout this list, there has been a couple of chapters who blend into the background by simply being exactly what a force of Space Marines is expected to be. Not every group can distinguish itself very much from their comrades, but the Silver Eagles are notable specifically because there's even less information than normal. We don't know their homeworld or if they're a fleet-based chapter. We don't know their preferred fighting style or any of their notable victories. We have one mention of an incident involving the loss of 2 whole companies while fighting alongside the Dark Angels. During the liberation of Calva Signoris, the Silver Eagles were reportedly being supported by a small contingent of the Dark Angels under the command of their master chaplain, Asmodai. When, during a pivotal moment in their push, the Dark Angels abandoned their positions and began a mission of their own. Without their support, the initial battle plan fell apart, and the Silver Eagles took heavy losses. This singular mention of bad fortune is enough to say that these successors did exist, but the lack of anything else is suspicious. Are the Silver Eagles still operating? Have they become another casualty of the Eternal Crusade? Or have they fallen like so many of their brothers have? One of the more curious entries on this list, the Silver Skulls, are truly bizarre. As their name suggests, the main color of this chapter is a silver helmet, with the rest of their armor being unpainted gunmetal and a black shoulder pad with a stylized skull. Does anyone else think that looks like the Iron Warriors icon? It's probably nothing. When the skulls first appeared in the registries, their homeworld was marked as a planet called Liria, but in M33 it was declared a dead world as the chapter was forced to enact exterminatus protocols when they were overrun by the forces of Nurgle. Since then, they have operated from the world of Varsavia on the very edge of Segmentum Obscurus. This means that they have been fighting on the frontier of the Imperium for almost 10 millennia, and more recently while being cut off from the rest of the Imperium by massive warp storms. By all accounts, the Silver Skulls are some of the staunchest defenders of the Imperium, and were elevated to being one of the 10 shield chapters of Ultramar when the Primarch Guilliman returned. The really strange thing about the Silver Skulls has to do with their cultural practices. Regardless of where they started, the chapter's new homeworld of Varsavia has had a profound effect on them. First off, they honor all of their dead, even their chapter serfs. Second, they ritualistically tattoo their entire bodies, with the head being the last part touched, and the right to even begin doing so being something earned through deeds on the battlefield. Lastly, the Silver Skulls have a tendency to gather the heads of their most impressive enemies, cleaning them and encasing them in silver to be displayed in their chapter fortress as a trophy. Now, they are certainly not the only Ultramarine successor to have an obsession with taking skulls, but that seems a little chaosy, doesn't it? And look, this is likely a coincidence, but the Silver Skulls are renowned siege masters. Okay, that's a lot of weird coincidences. They're a chapter that wears unpainted gunmetal armor with a stylized skull motif that looks suspiciously like that of a Traitor Legion. They are siege specialists, just like that same legion. They take skulls religiously. They come from a legion that's been known to take in warriors of other legions. Oh, and it says here that they were investigated by the Inquisition on suspicion that their gene seed wasn't actually from the Ultramarines, and that investigation was even completed. That's good. Let's see if it says here that the results were presented to the Silver Skulls leadership, and oh, all the records were sealed, and the Ultramarines Primarch himself named the chapter as one of the scions of Guilliman. So that clears all that up then. Nothing else to look into. Let's move on. One of the most staunch defenders of the Ultramarine territories, these white armored successors are the White Consuls, and just like their black armored brothers, they are a chapter on the brink of extinction. Originally based on the world of Sabatine, the White Consuls formed the furthest bulwark of the Astartes Prices, the group of Marine chapters assigned to watch over the Eye of Terror in case of Chaos Incursion. This meant that they are one of the chapters stationed furthest from Ultramar itself. This has led to some interesting divergences from the Codex-approved organization rules. Specifically, they have 2 chapter masters. This is allowed mostly because of their extreme distance from the support of their brother chapters, but essentially the White Consuls have 1 chapter master to organize the defense of their homeworld and another chapter master to lead their forces abroad. Additionally, they are one of the few chapters to actively take part in the Imperial cult, worshipping the Emperor as a god. Despite these oddities, however, the White Consuls are highly regarded amongst the Ultramarine successors, and whenever they manage to send a representative all the way to Macrogge to engage in the councils there, it's a cause for celebration. Or was. The 13th Black Crusade was nearly the death of the whole chapter, as almost every single White Consul's company were sent to defend Cadia, leaving only the 4th company to defend Sabatine. Cadia fell, taking with it the 9 companies stationed there, and Sabatine was attacked by an overwhelming force of traitor Astartes, led by the Death Guard warband known as the Lords of Silence. Clearly outmatched, the remnants of the chapter were forced to retreat, leaving Sabatine to be transformed into a plague planet of Nurgle. The White Consuls are currently looking for a new home planet to set up and rebuild on. And that completes the list of currently known second founding Ultramarine successor chapters. This list is shifting constantly, with chapters such as the Iron Snakes only recently making it into Imperial records as Ultramarine successors at all. But that's the nature of lore in such a wild universe, with records spanning tens of millennia and fighting forces burning out and rising from the ashes over and over again. Some of these second founding chapters are not often included in the lists of notable successors, but since everyone has a favorite, it's almost impossible to make a comprehensive list without qualifiers like second founding chapters only. That being said, the Ultramarines are popular right now for some reason, so if there's a successor of any founding that you'd like to see us cover, don't be afraid to tell us in the comments below. And as always, make sure you subscribe so you never miss out on more lore.